by the enemy within. I was here on 9/11. We were attacked by the enemy without.
That's crazy. Drive pace.
We need to all work together. Tame and reduce the anger. That some stoke. What some, not all, Madam Speaker, but some in this House and in this Senate are doing today will not change the outcome of the election, which is the clear and insurmountable victory of President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. Instead, all they will accomplish is to further the dangerous
What are you talking about, Trump?
This was written
What are you talking about, Trump?
this Capitol was assaulted.
Yeah, kind of. Basically saying it's a fucked up day.
Before this democracy
Careful what words you use.
was
That's what they want to use. Fuck that. But they can't.
Yeah.
Even his own party is pissed off at him.
Oh, I know.
That's bad.
encouraged by the Commander-in-Chief. Instead, all they will accomplish is to further the dangerous divisions, as I said, among our people and energize conspiracy theories stoked by our foreign adversaries, which seek to erode America's confidence in our democracy and our system of free and fair elections. I was here in 2000. I was strongly in favor of Al Gore for president. And my candidate got more votes than the other candidate. His name was George Bush, of course. And one of the saddest days was January 20th of 2001, when our candidate, who won the election, in my view, was not elected. But it was also one of the proudest moments of my career. Because the greatest power on earth passed peacefully. From Bill Clinton to George W. Bush. Not a shot was fired. Nobody assaulted this caucus, or this Congress, or this team. Because we were not disappointed now. Because we were not angry? No. Because we believe in democracy. We believe in we the people. And we, the people, one of the speakers, I think it was the senator from Texas, said, we're here for the people. If those were the people, we're in a lot of trouble. Our electoral system, our democratic system, however, did not break under the strains of the misinformation, the claims of fraud, which court after court after court have dismissed out of fear. Not because there was a little evidence, because there was no evidence. That's why we're the longest lasting constitutional democracy in the world. I hope all of us in this body are proud of that and understand why that's the case. Because, as Dick Gephardt said on this floor many years ago, democracy is a substitute for war to resolve differences. It proved once more that ever-beating strong heart that gives life to our republic and our freedoms. Not strength, Madam Speaker, and life and property of our institutions and our law. But most importantly, it is powered by citizens and leaders' commitment to our Constitution. Not just us, we swear it up. I think all of them. Barack Obama spoke from that chamber and he said, I'm going to be taking another title next year. Citizen. He was proud to take that and every citizen needs to protect, preserve, and uplift our democracy. Some today did not do that. Many today. 68 years ago in Springfield, Illinois, Governor Adlai Stevenson gracefully conceded his loss to General Dwight Eisenhower. He said this, it is traditionally American. He told his deeply disappointed supporters to fight hard before an election. But then he added, it is equally traditional to close ranks as soon as the people have spoken, not the Congress, not the electors, the people have spoken. That which unites us as American citizens is far greater than that which divides us as political parties. It was another man from Springfield, 48 years earlier, who won re-election to the presidency and the national crisis that tested our country and its democratic institutions, who pleaded even in his hour of victory for the same spirit of reconciliation. That was the party of Lincoln. That hasn't happened to this hour. Lincoln said, now that the election is over, he asked, may not all, having a common interest, reunite in a common effort to save our common country. Such is the duty of American who stands for righteousness, or participates in our politics, to be either humble in triumph or gracious in defeat.
Yeah.
I've lost some elections. Not too many. One of them.
Watching the arguments about taking out of the debate in the Senate, Senator Hawley, we kind of led the idea of opposing accepting these electoral votes.
In the capital of the United States. And in this country, in the United States of America, we cannot say emphatically enough, violence is not how you achieve something. Violence is not how you achieve something better. Our Constitution, with the words of Abraham Lincoln, no appeal from balance to violence, which is what we saw unfortunately attempted tonight. There is no place for that in the United States of America. And that's why I submit to my colleagues that what we're doing here tonight is actually very important. Because for those who have concerns about the integrity of our elections, those who have concerns about what happened in November, this is the appropriate means. This is the lawful place where those objections and concerns should be heard. This is the forum that the law provides for our laws, provide for those concerns to be registered, not through violence, not by appealing for balance to votes, but here in this lawful process. And so for those who say that this is just a formality today, an antique ceremony that we've engaged in for a couple of hundred years, I can't say that I agree. I can't say that our precedents suggest that. I actually think it's very vital what we do. The opportunity to be heard, to register objections is very vital because this is the place where those objections are to be heard and dealt with, debated, and finally resolved. In this lawful means, peaceful, without violence, without attacks, without bullets. And so, Mr. President, let me just say now briefly, in lieu of speaking about it later, a word about Pennsylvania, which is a state that I have been focused on, objected to, as an example of why people are concerned, millions of Americans concerned about our election integrity. State of Pennsylvania, quite apart from allegations of any fraud, you have a state constitution that has been interpreted for over a century to say that there is no mail-in balloting permitted except for in very narrow circumstances that's also provided for in the law. Last year, Pennsylvania elected officials passed a whole new law that allows universal mail-in balloting, and did it irregardless of what the Pennsylvania Constitution said. And then when Pennsylvania citizens tried to go and be heard on this subject before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they were dismissed on grounds of procedure, timeliness, in violation of that Supreme Court's own precedent. So the merits of the case have never been heard. The constitutionality of the statute actually has never been defended. I'm not aware of any court that has passed on its constitutionality. Actually, I'm not aware of anybody who's defended the constitutionality. And this because of the statute that governed this last election, and there were over 2.5 million mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. This is the forum. Pennsylvania Supreme Court hasn't heard the case. There's no other court to go to hear the case in the state. And so this is the appropriate place for these concerns to be raised, which is why I raised them here today. And I hope that this body will not miss the opportunity to take affirmative action to address the concerns of so many millions of Americans, to say to millions of Americans tonight that violence is never wrong. Violence will not be tolerated, but those that engage in it will be prosecuted. But that this body will act to address the concerns of all Americans across the country. We do need an investigation into irregularities, fraud. We do need a way forward together. We need election security reform. I bet my friends on the other side of that don't disagree with that. We need to find a way to move forward on that together so the American people from both parties and all walks of life can have confidence in their elections and that we can arrange ourselves under the rule of law that we should. Thank you for being here.
And Senator Josh Hawley essentially organized a number of Republican senators to stand in opposition to the counting of the electoral votes. Ostensibly, they're to argue over the Arizona, but talking about Pennsylvania, and didn't get everything he said, but he seemed to be kind of laying this aside, laying the objection aside.
For a couple of hopefully we had a couple of those that we had Mr. Derek Hay, one of them, to help us kind of do the teammates here, because Derek, I had Josh Hawley. I mean, I could see it, but we maybe put something at the top that we can maybe look into a little bit later, but it seemed in some ways he was saying, you know, we have the right suggestion that we're not, but we were planning to do, but it seemed like he was saying, but I'm not going to do that anymore. But he didn't come right out and say it. That was just my kind of general impression. The way you take it from it.
No, I agree with that. I think this was Senator Hawley who last week probably only to get one bite at this apple here. Remember, he had said earlier this week that his objection was going to be primarily focused on Pennsylvania. We're supposed to be talking about Arizona right now, and he made the point to get his specific grievances about the way the election was conducted in Pennsylvania out during this 5-minute section that he was entitled to hear. I think that means we're probably not going to be hearing from him again later tonight. The beginning of his remarks were mostly just about condemning the violence that we saw here today. That, you know, frankly, I think a lot of his colleagues are looking at him. You can see Mitt Romney, who's been very outspoken against these objections, sort of shooting lasers at Josh Hawley during that speech from behind it. Very frustrated that this happened here at all today, in part because of Hawley kind of coming out at the very beginning and saying, we will raise these objections on the Pennsylvania case. But you heard him say his argument, this is, you know, sort of the last best opportunity to have this discussion. But it seemed like he was willing to have it here very briefly in what's supposed to be a debate about Arizona.
Yeah, I think so, because, I mean, he did say it, I wrote it down, he said, I'll just say a word about Pennsylvania in lieu of later, which I interpreted as him saying, I'm gonna say my piece about Pennsylvania, but maybe not that objection that he had planned to make. Let's go to Chuck Todd, Meet the Press. Chuck, you speak Washington fluently as well. How did you interpret that?
No, I thought the same thing, and it's like, okay. And again, we've been watching this, and we've noticed who's been speaking on the Republican side. We've not, remember before we were hearing from some Republicans, like Ben Saxton, but who are been against this the whole time. But it almost seems as if they're trying to hurry up and let them say their piece, the Hollies. I imagine at this point we'll be waiting for Ted Cruz. Oh, yes, let's hear it.
Let's play safe there. Let's listen to Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader who refused to acknowledge Joe Biden's victory earlier, facing some issues on his staff.
Here in Milwaukee on Monday, my colleague
The FBI, the Secret Service, who face the most difficult challenges, but did their duty with confidence and strength. Many of them are injured right now. And it also extends to its chamber, where both Democrats and Republicans showed courage, calm, and resolve. I'd like to recognize the members now who helped to hold the line. Mark Wayne Mullen, Tony Gonzalez, Jason Quill, Pat Fallon, and Troy Mary. Working with the Capitol Police, they ensured the floor of this chamber was never breached. These are the heroes among us. Thank you for this opportunity. Looking back on the past few hours, it is clear this Congress will not be the same after today. And I hope it will be the better. I hope not just this institution, but I hope every American pauses for that moment and thinks among themselves. That we can disagree with one another, but not disown. We can respect the voices of others. There's many times we debate on this body, and we should. There's many times we can get heated. I still consider spitting Hitler a very good friend. There's times I get upset, a poem at home, to express the things I may not see fair or just. But that's the way we should handle it. The majority leader is right. We are all Americans first. But should we also think for a moment, what do we put on social media? What do we convey to one another? Just because you have a personal opinion different than mine, you have a right to say it, but nobody has a right to become a mob. And we all should stand united in condemning the mob together.
Back over to the Senate, Mitt Romney was opposed to these objections to the electoral vote counting scheme.
Thinking about this building, whether their grandpa was okay. I knew I was okay. I must tell you, well, I was proud to serve with these men and women. It was an extraordinary group of people. I'm proud to be a member of the United States Senate and meet with people of integrity as we do here today. Now we gather due to a selfish man's injured pride and the outrage of supporters whom we have deliberately misinformed for the past 2 months and stood to action this very morning. What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Those who choose to continue to support his dangerous gambit by objecting to the results of a legitimate democratic election will forever be seen as being complicit in an unprecedented attack against our democracy. Fairly or not, they'll be remembered for their role in this shameful episode in American history. That will be their legacy. I salute Senator Langford, Loeffler, and Braun and Daines, and I'm sure others who, in the light of today's outrage, have withdrawn their objection. For any who remain insistent on an audit in order to satisfy the many people who believe that the election was stolen, I offer this perspective. No congressional audit is ever going to convince these voters, particularly when the president will continue to say that the election was stolen. The best way we can show respect for the voter upset is by telling them the truth. That's the burden. That's the duty of leadership. The truth is that President-elect Biden won the election. President Trump lost. I've had that experience myself. It's no fun. Scores of courts, the president's own attorney general, state election officials, both Republican and Democrat, have reached that unequivocal decision. And in light of today's sad circumstances, I asked my colleague, do we weigh our own political fortunes more heavily than we weigh the strength of our republic, the strength of our democracy, and the cause of freedom? What's the weight of personal acclaim compared to the weight of conscience? Leader McConnell said that the vote today is the most important in his 36 years of public service. Think of that. Authorizing 2 wars, voting on 2 impeachments. He said that not because the vote reveals something about the election, it's because this vote reveals something about us. I urge my colleagues to move forward with completing the electoral count, to refrain from further objections, and to unanimously affirm the legitimacy of the presidential election. Thank you, Mr. President.
Democratic leader.
Senator from New Hampshire, Senator Shaheen.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Mr. President, so we've been watching flip flopping between the 2 chambers of Congress that are adopting a section back at it and moving ahead with the business of certifying the electoral votes and official July delivery in operation since 2 weeks from today, January 20th, under the Constitution. And it's a really good hate we saw Mitt Romney as candidate recovered, and he said that I know it's not easy to lose, he's had the experience himself, but he was very blunt, did not mince words, right at the top saying, we are here because of a selfish man's injured pride, referring to the president, and then later said here that if you want to honor the Trump voter, you have to tell them the truth.
Yeah, and that comment seemed like a direct message to Josh Hawley, who spoke only a few minutes before. This idea proposed by some of these objectors here that somehow we need a commission to study this election to get the idea of how, as the president believes, it was stolen and what really happened. Romney trying to cut through all the noise there and say the best way to honor the opinions of the people who are mad is to tell them the truth and to be leaders. And I'm struck by both the emotion in Romney's voice at the very start of that, talking about his 25 grandchildren and they were calling to make sure that he was okay here today doing his job. But also the fact that this is the second time in a year that Romney has really spoken out strongly against his own party and the president of it. Remember, he was the only Republican vote for the removal of President Trump in the impeachment, which was only a year ago, although it feels like 7 lifetimes ago. But this is now twice that he sort of tried to capture this moment of conscience in the Republican Party, saying this is not acceptable and we need to tell people the truth. A very powerful speech. And you heard the applause from members on the floor.
All right, Garrett, thanks very much. We're going to Kristen Walker right now at the White House. Kristen, we understand there is potential more fallout happening within the president's staff.
It has begun to happen, Lester, in the form of resignations. Of course, just a short while ago, we reported that the First Lady's Chief of Staff, Stephanie Grisham, announced her resignation, and now there have been more money department's top advisor, Sarah Matthews, announcing her resignation, as well as the social secretary. And there's a lot of discussion and buzz about the idea that there may be more high-level resignations to follow. We are told, according to multiple sources, that among those considering resigning is the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, his deputy, Matt Pottinger, as well as the Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao. That would be quite significant. Now, we have reached out for official comments, so far have not gotten a response, but I do think it underscores the sense here at the White House and the mounting sort of divide that we are starting to see. Officials who are frankly quite angered by what they witnessed today and the fact that President Trump released 2 tweets and a statement on Twitter, a short video statement responding to those who stormed the Capitol. And this is really mixed messaging. The president again reiterating those false claims of widespread voter fraud and calling for peace, but not doing it defiantly enough, not doing it clearly enough. And so this is an administration right now, Lester, that is frankly sharply divided. I can tell you that the lights are off. I was just told that the president right now is in the residence. We know that he was watching these developments unfold throughout the day. There's only one White House official here inside the White House fielding a number of press inquiries, but the lights are out here. And so it really is a metaphor, I think, for what we are starting to see, which is Donald Trump becoming increasingly isolated as he refuses to accept the reality of the situation, which is what Mitt Romney just said, that he has lost this election. There has been mounting pressure on him for days now among some of his closest allies inside and outside of the West Wing to try to get him to acknowledge that, to try to get him to think of next steps. What will his offering look like? What will his exit be? And yet he remains defiant.
You said that there would be no concession. I made it very clear that the months before the lighting broke out.
We should also note a little bit that Elaine Chao, one of the names that Kristen mentioned as being a ponder in the future, she of course is the right majority leader.
Let's look at the February moderator and tomorrow and talk about it. As we watch what's unfolding, how do you see this playing out? Do you have a better picture of how people are feeling?
I think what they do, I mean, it looks like they're gonna get this, they're moving in a direction. I do think that we're gonna have a little bit of a lag here because of how the House is voting during the pandemic, and that it takes a long time for the voting itself to begin when they officially reject the Arizona challenge. So in that sense, I think it is, we're making some progress, but I do wanna have something to leave it with a little bit of patience because they have to vote in groups in the House, so when they actually start voting, that's gonna be a bit time consuming. But I think the real question is, and the real unknown is, what are they gonna do about the president tomorrow? And, you know, this is something that there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of everything, but there's clearly a demand for some accountability in some form or another. And what are they gonna do? And I think that you can see there's a lot of folks realizing they need to do something. Resignation is a way to try to protect your own reputation. But there needs to be something done, obviously. I think you certainly see there needs to be something that's done. And I think there's a lot of grasping to figure out what that is.
As we continue to watch the debate play out right now, this House of Representatives, what we did.
This hallowed temple of democracy is where generations of Americans have peacefully come together to face our nation's greatest challenges, bridge our deepest fissures, and create a more perfect system of government. This is the appropriate place we stand to respectfully and peacefully give voice to the people we represent across our diverse country. The representatives of the American people in this House are standing up for three fundamental American beliefs. The right to vote is sacred, that a representative has a duty to represent his or her constituents, and that the rule of law is a hallmark of our nation. The words of you, Madam Speaker, from this very chamber, when some of my colleagues and friends across the aisle objected to the 2005 Electoral College certification. In fact, there were objections on this floor to the certification of nearly every Republican president in my lifetime. In 1989, in 2001, in 2005, and in 2017. So history is our guide that the people's sacred house is the appropriate venue for a peaceful debate. And this peaceful debate serves as a powerful condemnation to the violence that perpetrated our Capitol grounds today. The violence that was truly un-American. Today's discussion is about the Constitution, and it is about the American people. But it must also be about clearly and resolutely condemning the violence that occurred today. I am honored each and every day to represent New York's 21st Congressional District, and I believe it is my solemn and sacred duty to serve as their voice and their vote in the People's House. Tens of millions of Americans are concerned that the 2020 election featured unconstitutional overreach by unelected state officials and judges ignoring state election laws. We can and we should peacefully and respectfully discuss these concerns.
In Pennsylvania, the state Supreme Court and Secretary of State unilaterally and unconstitutionally rewrote election law, eliminating signature maximum requirements. In Georgia, there was constitutional overreach when the Secretary of State unilaterally and unconstitutionally gutted signature matching for absentee ballots and in essence eliminated voter verification required by state election law. In Wisconsin, officials issued illegal rules to circumvent the state law passed by the legislature as the Constitution requires that required absentee voters to provide photo identification before obtaining ballots. And in Michigan, signed affidavits document numerous unconstitutional irregularities. Officials physically blocking the legal right of poll watchers to observe vote counts, illegal counting of late ballots, and hand-scanning ballots for the previous day stage. I know that the constituents and the American people cherish the Constitution, and they know, according to the Constitution, elected officials posted to the people and things like
Look at the Marie Stefanik of New York arguing against the count of the electoral vote as we continue to watch this ping pong on both sides of the Capitol. But what turned out was this issue of social media, which was, a lot of new questions about this and what's on it.
Yeah, and this is the way that one of them is that Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook have now locked out the president of their social media accounts based on information that violated their policies. But let's get to Joe Penn covers that tech and Silicon Valley first for more on the thinking behind the decision and what exactly it amounts to. Savannah, these major tech companies, some of the most powerful companies in the world, are under tremendous pressure tonight to do even more than just suspend the president temporarily. So far, what we know, Facebook and Instagram have blocked his accounts for 24 hours. That means he won't be allowed to post within that period of time. Twitter also instituted a 12-hour block, and interestingly, a warning of a permanent suspension if he continues to violate the rules at Twitter. And so they're taking action faster and more aggressively than they ever have before. But this comes as a lot of critics are saying, look, you have done too little, too late, because so much of this violence, this right-wing extremism, disinformation, has been allowed to grow and blossom on social media for years now, with piecemeal policies that have been put into place, but the president has been allowed to act more freely because of his position, his authority, and his position of power. What's really interesting is we just got confirmation of Mark Zuckerberg's internal email to Facebook employees, and he has been long under fire for saying that, this is a free speech issue for the president and for politics in general. Well, not so much allowing that inside the company.
Thankfully that tomorrow
not just protests, and Zuckerberg says he's treating this situation as an emergency, and that Facebook is implementing additional measures to keep people safe. Now, this is coming as there are ongoing calls for these social media companies to do more, but so far Twitter really out front, putting it plainly, saying if the president continues to violate their terms of service, their policies against hate and violence, they are actively considering permanently suspending him. And of course, as we all know, Twitter is the president's seemingly his favorite megaphone for getting his message out there, and these tools will not be available to him. But certainly a lot of chatter going on within these tech companies as well. Our NBC News business and tech team also reporting that inside these big social media companies, there's more and more pressure on the leadership to take more aggressive action, to do more, to prevent more of these calls to violence from the most powerful seat in the world from coming to light on these platforms and influencing so many people. But so far, those are the actions that have been taken by these ultra-powerful tech companies, guys. All right, Joe, thank you very much. Let's go to Hallie Jackson at the White House as we continue to watch what happens in the Senate and see how this is going to unfold. What are you hearing, Hallie?
Yeah, listen, Savannah, I think that from the White House perspective, there are more people that we're talking to tonight and I'm having a conversation with tonight
the more you're getting a sense of people that are extremely troubled by what they've seen from President Trump. That is evidenced not just by the resignations, Savannah, that I know we would tick through here tonight, from, for example, the social secretary, from others, but the discussion of some resignations by some very high-level officials, including based on sources that I've talked to, the National Security Advisor, perhaps the Transportation Secretary. We've reached out, obviously, for more official comment, but there are text messages, phone calls flying across the Capitol, across the White House, and across Washington right now. As we look now at what's happening on the Senate floor, on the House of Representatives floor, worth noting and underscoring what Garrett Haake was talking about a moment ago, Josh Hawley not backing down. There was some consideration. Earlier in the evening, I had been in touch with sources over on Capitol Hill, whose hope, frankly, would be that senators would do like what we saw from, for example, Senator Kelly Loeffler, and back down, basically, back away from this objection situation because of the message that they feel that it sends. That is not going to be the case here, as Senator Hawley made clear in these remarks. You have to think that the president is watching this. He is somebody who is very attuned to coverage of what is happening. But his vice president, who he is presumably furious with, considering President Trump had for days tried to lean on Vice President Pence to stop any of this from happening. Of course, the vice president has no authority to do so. As we know, the president is oftentimes affected by the coverage that he sees and the way that that is unfolding. And right now, it is just, I think, some serious alarm bells going off in the halls of the White House tonight.
You mentioned Hawley pressing on with his objections. They're still talking about this Arizona right now. Do we expect him to hold that position with the other states?
You know, potentially, Lester. There's some discussion about, for example, and this has been out there and reported about possibly Pennsylvania, for example, where else you might see that. But yeah, you're right. They're still focusing on Arizona at this point. You still have multiple states to go there.
All right, Hallie, thanks.
It sounds like we might have just
We lost you.
lost Hallie there. Let's go to Senate floor. Senator Angus King, who is independent but caucuses with the Democrats. Let's listen.
The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. The mob violence and attack we saw on our Capitol today should be a wake-up call to each and every one of us of what happens when we fail to come together, not as Democrats and Republicans, but each of us as Americans, to stand up to a president who time and again has shown contempt for our democracy, contempt for our Constitution. Here on the Capitol, we witnessed people taking down an American flag and putting up a Trump flag. That is not democracy in the United States of America. As every senator who has spoken has mentioned, we have for hundreds of years had a peaceful transfer of power. Nobody likes to lose, and supporters of the losing candidate are always disappointed. What's different this time? We all know what's different this time. We had a president who was a senator from New Jersey said even before a vote was cast that if he didn't win the election, it was going to be a fraud. And every day since then has perpetrated that lie. We have a president who just today criticized very loyal vice president who's presiding right now, urging him to disregard his responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States in order to reinstall Donald Trump as president. The same person who got on the phone to the Secretary of State in Georgia
and threatened him to change the results of the election. Mr. President, I read something this week I never thought I'd read in a newspaper in the United States of America. It was an op-ed by all the living former secretaries of defense, including Secretaries Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Mattis, warning the country about our tradition of peaceful transfer of power, and it would be inappropriate for the military to take
Listening
shots.
to some of the debate that's going on in the United States Senate that's been going for almost 2 hours now, so we'll be watching to see whether the Senate moves on with this debate and this process. While that goes on, though, let's check in with Garrett Hague on Capitol Hill, our correspondent there, because there's a big question mark about Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, who was the first Republican to come out and say that he would object to the certification of the electoral this day. We were trying to read the tea leaves of the statement he made, whether or not he was going to stick to those objections or whether he was going to decide to stand down. We're hearing conflicting things now, so could you explain where does that stand and what?
Make his objection known on paper, we presume it will, means we get triggered into another one of these up to 2 hours of debate sometime later on tonight. So session like this one tonight on the issue of Pennsylvania, whether it goes the full 2 hours is an open question. What's not an open question is, once again, this will not change the results of any state, Pennsylvania or otherwise. It's just going to drag this on a little bit further tonight. Holly perhaps feeling like he had put his name on paper earlier in the week saying he would object to Pennsylvania. He still feels like he's got to do that.
And David, how many states in total could we see challenged?
There was discussion during the course of the week up to 6. There's sort of 6 battleground states that we've talked the most about: Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Those were the 6 that I think we were most focused on early in the week. Pennsylvania was the one that Republicans felt like the strongest case on, that they could make the best argument about if they were so inclined. Whether they do all 6 now, I think is an open question.
So just so I can try to understand it, if in the Senate side, Hawley objects, but then yields his time, does that presumably end the debate on the Senate side, but the 2 hours could unfold on the House side? Or would the 2 hours go forward on the Senate side too?
Up to 2 hours and still go forward. Hawley can only yield his 5 minutes.
Okay.
So he can object, and again, if the House and Senate member both object, it forces this 2 hour clock. He can only yield his 5 minutes. So he's essentially saying, I object to this, but I'm not going to bother to tell you anything about why. Here's some other senators who may debate this.
All right, let's go back to the Senate floor. Lindsey Graham now is making his remarks.
In Louisiana, do it. To hold the country hostage to end Reconstruction. It worked. The conviction was 8-7. It didn't work. Nobody accepted it. The way it ended is when Hayes did a deal with these 3 states. You give me the electors, I'll kick the Union Army out. The rest is new. It led to Jim Crow. If you're looking for historical guidance, this is not the one to pick. If you're looking for a way to convince people there was no fraud, having a commission chosen by Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, and John Roberts is not going to get you where you want to go. It ain't going to work. So it's not going to do any good. It's going to delay, because credibility is a dark chapter of our history. That's why I'm not with you. But I will fight to my death for you. You're able to object. You're not doing anything wrong. Other people have objected. I just think it's a uniquely bad idea to delay this election. Trump and I, we've had a hell of a journey. I hate it being this way. Oh my God, I hate it. My point of view has been a consequential brother. But today, first thing you'll see. All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough. I've tried to be helpful. But when the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled 4-3 that they didn't violate the Constitution of Wisconsin, I agree with the 3, but I accept the 4. If Al Gore can accept 5-4, he's not president. I can accept Wisconsin 4-3. Pennsylvania, it went to the Second Circuit. So much for all the judges being in Trump's pocket. They said, no, you're wrong. I accept the Pennsylvania Second Circuit. Trump's lawsuit wasn't right. Georgia, they said the Secretary of State took the law in his own hands. He changed election laws unlawfully. A federal judge said, no, I accept the federal judge even though I don't agree with it. Fraud. They said there's 66,000 people in Georgia under 18 voting. How do people believe that? I asked, give me 10. And I had one. They said 8,000 felons in prison in Arizona voting. Give me 10. I got one. Does that say there's problems in every election? I don't buy this. Enough's enough. We gotta end it. Vice President Pence, what they're asking you to do, you won't do because you can't. Talk about interesting times. I associate myself with Rand Paul. How many times will you hear that? The mob has done something nobody else could do to get me and Rand to agree. Rand is right. If you're a conservative, this is the most offensive concept in the world that a single person could about 155 million people. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and the House of Representatives, open all certificates and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be president. Where in there does it say Mike can say, I don't like the result? I want to send them back to the States. I believe it was fraud. To the conservatives who believe in the Constitution, now your chance to stand up and be counted.
Thank you.
Originalism kept me in. It means what it says. So my, Miss Vice President, is hanging in. They said, we count on Mike. You're gonna do the right thing. You're gonna do the constitutional thing. You got a son who flies F-35. You got a son-in-law who flies F-18. They're up there flying so that we get it right here. There are people dying. To make sure we have a chance to argue among ourselves. And when it's over, it is over. It is over. The final thing, Joe Biden. I've traveled the world with Joe. I hope he lost. I prayed he would lose. He won. He's a legitimate president of the United States. I cannot convince people, certain groups, by my words, but I will tell you by my actions, that maybe I, among any, above all others in this body, need to say Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are lawfully elected. I will become the president and the vice president of the United States on January the 20th.
Some cooks and places that we've been able to.
What an extraordinary moment that we just saw on Capitol Hill, where Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republican who has so often been by the president's side, but as he said, was journalistic because his government is with the president, sometimes he's not. So he caught that property. I want to say with the vice president and testimony.
And the senator from Texas, Mr. Cruz, and others be sustained. Second. There is. Clerk will call the roll. Jim Mosley.
They're starting to vote. Is Gary Hayes still with us, our Capitol correspondent? Good. It's so they're voting roll call. What's the vote on?
This is the vote on upholding the objection to being selected to the electorate. So yes votes here are in favor of the objection, no votes are against it. This will tell us a lot about how many of the objectors, I think it was about 12 or 13, are still with them. We've seen over the last few hours several of these Republicans who had previously said they would object to the electoral results of these states recant. So this vote won't tell us when this night will happen. It's going to tell us a lot about the degree of support that has drifted away over the course of what we saw today.
And to the thought we were just having this, I told you last year, Lindsey Graham, what a moment.
It's not going to get very emotional at the end. Basically, he's saying, well, Donald Trump, trading one, trading win,
Abraham or Mitt Romney, these senators will be shaken by what has transpired today on Capitol Hill. Some of them, their voices were shaking, the passion, we see passion on Capitol Hill from time to time, but you know, say it again and again and again, you just can't say it enough. We've never seen a day like this. We've never seen events like this. And we have not seen statements like
Well,
that.
imagine being Donald Trump and watching the TV today, even before the riots broke out. You hear Mitch McConnell basically saying, "Give it up, it's over, don't do this, it's gonna harm the Republicans." You hear the vice president puts out a statement again before the riot saying, "Can't do it, I've got to follow the Constitution, I can't save you, I can't save, your campaign."
And he's seeing White House staff at the various levels resign, including, his former press secretary, the First Lady's chief of staff, Stephanie Grisham, resigning from the Can you imagine where is he tonight? Is he in the residence meeting Oval Office? What is the First Lady saying? He can't tweet, he's not on Facebook, he's not on Instagram. So, it's just, you wonder what his mindset is right now, what his next steps are, and you and I were just talking. Everyone's going to wake up tomorrow morning in Washington. What will the situation be there? What are the plans to protect the Capitol again? What are the plans to make sure that any demonstrations that transpire are in fact peaceful? Which is as much a hallmark of our democracy as anything else we
And
find.
there's 2 more weeks left in the presidency.
Yes.
And that is, that's certainly worth noting. We want to bring in the press moderator, Chuck Todd. Chuck, you should obviously get into this conversation. Dive in where you feel appropriate.
Well, no, I mean, you're right, on the Lindsey Graham moment there, and, I've been speaking to Lindsey Graham for a long time, I'd like to say. I thought it was fascinating how he complimented the president when he gave his home. I still think he's a consequential president, it is a fascinating word for him, right? He didn't praise him positively, he used a word that can be interpreted any which way you want, which I think it's a subtle choice of words that he made, but it's a reminder that you see that there was the Lindsey Graham who was one of the bulwarks with John McCain against Trump and Trumpism. I almost caught a glimpse of that version of Lindsey Graham during that. But look, I will say this: you get the sense there's a phrase back in the during the Goldwater 64 convention, the phrase was "it's time for choosing." I get a sense here a lot of these senators realize this is a big moment for themselves. This is a big moment for restore the democracy. And I would say there's quite a few senators are stepping up to the line. Many are not, and we know the ones that have created the situation. But there are many that are attempting to step up tonight. So if there is some reassurance that I think this Senate debate is giving some of the country.
Yeah, Chuck, thank you. It's just past the 10 o'clock hour here on the East Coast. To say that today has been extraordinary is an understatement. Capitol under siege in a scene that was almost too hard to watch. What began as relatively peaceful protests this morning soon turned into something we've never seen before. A mob of people stormed the U.S. Capitol. Here's Casey Hunt now to look at how today's chaos unfolded.
It was a frightening and appalling scene. American democracy under siege by an angry mob. Thousands of Trump supporters storming the Capitol. Rioters breaching the walls of Congress. Tear gas. Broken windows. Even shots fired. Chaos and tragedy. It began today when Trump supporters gathered in Washington, D.C., urged on by the president to protest Congress's vote count today to declare Joe Biden the winner. For weeks, Trump had lied about the election results, alleging voter fraud. And he expressed defiance about the election's outcome again today to his supporters.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen.
After that speech, his followers marched to Capitol Hill to protest. Where inside, senators and congressmen began counting the electoral college votes. While some Republicans were still trying to dispute Biden's win inside the Capitol, the mob outside was going out of control. Defiant, cheering. They faced off with police on the Capitol steps. And then the standoff became a tussle, the crowd pushing to get inside. And suddenly, the mob broke through, past metal barriers and the police. Climbing through windows, sweeping aside security deep into the heart of Congress.
My challenge today,
On the Senate floor, a senator's speech was interrupted. And the business of the day, count electoral college votes, halted. Lawmakers were evacuated safely. Others sheltered in their offices. And the rioters continued to rampage, trying to smash through doors, even the doors to the House chamber. On the other side, enemies waited with their guns drawn. Elsewhere, protesters made themselves comfortable, breaking into offices, even climbing the walls. And then a sudden frenzy outside as paramedics rushed Helen into the hospital. She'd been shot, and she died a few hours later. As a shocked world watched the chaos unfold at the Capitol, Joe Biden took the stage.
I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege.
Biden, who takes office in 2 weeks, blasted the rioters' actions.
It's not a protest, it's insurrection.
And as he walked off the stage, this.
Enough is enough.
Minutes later, President Trump tweeted out a video telling his supporters he felt their pain, repeating his lies about a stolen election, and only then did he urge the mob to go home. Twitter later locked the president's account for 12 hours. By late afternoon, Capitol police officers and the National Guard converged on the Capitol, deploying smoke grenades and tear gas, working to disperse rioters. This evening, with the curfew in effect, officials declared the inside of the Capitol secure. Questions piled up about how this kind of assault can happen. But tonight, with the Capitol and the nation shaken to the core, members of Congress were undaunted, going back to business that was interrupted this afternoon, counting the Electoral College votes to declare Joe Biden the country's next president.
AC Hunt walking us through just this remarkable day. It's almost hard to believe we experienced all that in one day, and it continues right now as we've been showing you in the House and Senate. Members debating objections that have been laid down by some Republicans to the formal counting of the electoral votes. You'll note my partner Savannah Guthrie is taking her leave. You'll see her tomorrow morning on Today from Washington, D.C. To lead our coverage in Washington. In the meantime, we want to continue our coverage of a conversation with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. She was inside the House chambers this afternoon and that chaos unfolded. Representative Jayapal, I don't know if you've seen this video of you and some others in the chambers. I don't know if you can see this monitor right now, but if you can give us a sense of what you were, how it unfolded from your perspective.
Yes, thank you so much. I cannot see that, and I haven't seen it, but I've gotten a lot of messages about that video. I was sitting in the gallery. The number of people in the front floor in the gallery was limited, so there were about a dozen of us up in the gallery, just overlooking the floor. And we started to hear the protesters, perhaps even before the people on the floor knew what was happening. We heard the noises, we heard the shouts and screams. The Capitol Police that were up in the gallery were sort of talking across to each other, across the various sections of the gallery. And then we saw Nancy Pelosi being shepherded out and Hoyer being shepherded out. And before we knew, over the course of maybe 10 minutes, the rest of the members were suspended for a little bit, and we tried to go back into session, were suspended again. And then the members on the floor were quickly ushered out, but those of us in the gallery were stuck there. And we started to hear screams. We heard that the protesters had taken over Statuary Hall, that they were coming towards the chamber. We were told to get gas masks from under the seat, which we did, and some people put them on. And then we were told to go to the ground. And so we were, trying to get under the ground. We could see down on the floor was empty by then, except for the Capitol Police. They had barricaded the doors they couldn't find a key. There was no keys. I didn't understand how this could be the case. But they barricaded the doors with furniture, with tables, desks, I'm not exactly sure what there was, and then, a number, maybe half a dozen Capitol officers were at each door with their guns drawn. There were shots fired into the chamber, you could hear them, and it was terrifying. Everyone else was escorted out, but those of us in the galleries were stuck there. There were also people at the doors of the gallery pounding. And so when the Capitol Police felt like it was finally safe, they did let us out. And then we had to go down 6 flights of stairs and make our way safely to a secure location. And we basically spent the last 5 hours.
I know this may be a silly question, but were you fearing for your safety at any point in this?
Yes, absolutely. There's no question. There were shots, there were armed protesters, we knew there were armed protesters, we knew that they were entering into various offices, breaking into offices, as Casey's video described. You know, that is, we knew what the scene was, and we knew there was violence being done, and we didn't stop. There were shots being fired into the chamber. This is the first time anything like this has happened since the 1800s. So this was unprecedented. I think, you know, it was a violent, armed mob that came to conduct insurrection. I don't know how to say it more gently. And when you talk about people being shaken on the floor, there is no question that people understood the consequences of the enslavement and the fueling of the violence by the president and his supporters.
Yeah, Representative John Paul, hearing you describe all that, it is certainly chilling, but it almost feels like you're describing some other place, some other part of the world, the kind of place that we would be calling for democracy to take hold. Were you able to process just the significance of what was happening in the U.S. Capitol?
It is, I feel like I'm still processing it. It has been an exhausting and incredibly difficult day because I don't think, Lester, that the consequences of this will be clear for some time. This is not over and done with. We will prevail, by the way. I just walked off the floor to talk to you, but we are in the process of continuing this debate. We will finish it tonight, and we will declare Joe Biden and Kamala Harris the president and the vice president of the United States as the will of the people requires that we do. But the attack on our democracy, the security of the Capitol, the security of all of us here, and frankly, the security of our Constitution and our democracy, and the fact that so many of our Republican colleagues didn't say anything for some time when we knew this was building, and the president was inciting this violence, and even almost to the very end, is condoning the violent mob that attacked the Capitol. So I think the consequences are still going to be processed for some time, but I do want to reassure the American people that their will be done. This election will hold. It will be certified by the Congress of the United States. We will do our constitutional duty, and we will ensure that we uphold our Constitution and our democracy. And no violent mob is going to stop us from doing that.
Representative Camilla John Paul, we thank you for sharing your story. As harrowing as it is, and we're glad you and all of your colleagues are safe tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, is in London tonight. Has a look at how today's events in Washington are being viewed overseas. And Richard, as jarring as these events are here, I know they've had a similar effect overseas.
Yes, I would say no overseas, Lester. People are not shocked. They are not surprised. I think they saw this coming. Lester, I was with you. I was with Savannah. She just left on election night 4 years ago, and we talked about how devastating this was for America's impression around the world. President Trump always talks about how he's going to restore it, how he is restoring America's standing in the world, how America is more respected again, and that he's going to bring America's standing back to some place where it's never been before. But tonight, people are looking at the U.S. with a degree of sympathy, but also with a great degree of concern. They are worried about the next 2 weeks. They are worried, can the United States survive these next 2 weeks, and what does it mean the U.S. is the leading superpower of the world. So, like a massive super state or any superpower, when it moves, the rest of the world is impacted. And he's still the commander, he's still the most powerful person on the planet for the next 2 weeks. And today, we showed great volatility, effectively inciting a mob to move toward the Capitol, and we all saw what happened. And people don't exactly understand around the world this transition process. Here in the UK, where I am, I'm in London right now, when a political leader is voted out of office, they leave immediately. It's over. It's over that day. There was not a several-month transition period of lots of formality. Over, the next person takes over, and they're ready. And they are wondering, what does it mean? What does it mean for our country? So there is sympathy, there is concern for the degree of fascination in dominating the world's headline. And particularly in Europe, there is a lot of support for the democratic process. There have been many tweets, dozens and dozens of tweets from world leaders expressing support for democracy and saying that this was an attack on the democratic process. And it's amazing that Twitter has become the main mode of communication for not just President Trump, but for everyone. And a few tweets that here sort of symbolize the reaction. You have Germany's foreign minister saying enemies of democracy will be pleased by these unbearable images. You have the First Minister of Scotland saying, shame on those who incited this attack on democracy. So the world is watching, and the world is concerned.
Yeah, Richard Engel with the view from overseas from London tonight. Richard, thank you very much. We are continuing to monitor the two sessions, the House and Senate sessions right now, debating objections to the counting of the electoral votes. I want to take you to the Senate chamber. Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey is speaking now.
And the complete exclusion of the late arriving ballots. How could we possibly invalidate the entire Pennsylvania election? Over 10,000 votes that were not even included in the vote count. The second charge we heard, and the senator from Missouri alluded to it this evening, is a 2019 Pennsylvania law that allows mail-in ballots for any reason that might violate the Pennsylvania Constitution. Well, first of all, as Senator Casey observed, this was a bipartisan law passed with nearly unanimous Republican support. Clearly, the state legislators and the governor believe it is consistent with the Pennsylvania Constitution. Secondly, this law was not challenged when it was passed. It wasn't challenged when it was applied during the June primary election. It was only challenged after President Trump lost the general election. But 2.6 million Pennsylvanians voted by mail-in ballot in the general election. Over 37% of Pennsylvania voters in good faith relied on the law to cast their votes as they had done previously. Now, I understand you can make a theoretical argument about whether this is consistent with Pennsylvania's Constitution, and that needs to be resolved for future elections. But because of this constitutional question that some people have, the objectors want to prevent Pennsylvania voters from participating in the presidential election entirely. That would be an outrageous remedy to this purported offense. The third charge we heard is that Pennsylvania officials did not properly implement Pennsylvania election law in a variety of other ways. But the Trump campaign has shown that many of these issues first of all, none of these issues would have changed the election outcome, and more importantly, the campaign had many opportunities of which it availed itself to litigate these issues. They did time and again, and they lost repeatedly, often in unanimous bipartisan decisions. Now, some of the objectors also cite Congress's own failure to investigate allegations of election irregularities, and that's their justification for refusing to certify the election results. But the allegations of election irregularities and fraud have been investigated. They've been adjudicated. They were adjudicated in the states in which they're alleged to have occurred. Now, in Pennsylvania, the Trump campaign took their case of election irregularities into the courtroom of Judge Matthew Brand of the Federal District Court. Judge Brand is a conservative Republican Federalist society.
I want you to pay close
And here's what he
attention
said
in
about the
case
Trump
you
campaign case, and I quote, "This court has been presented with strained legal arguments without merit and speculative accusations unsupported by evidence. In the United States of America, this cannot justify the disenfranchisement of a single voter, let alone all the voters of the sixth most populated state. End quote. So the campaign then appealed Judge Brand's decision to the Third Circuit, and they drew a three-judge panel, all Republican appointed judges, one appointed by President Trump. The panel concurred with Judge Brand. Mr. President, certainly there were irregularities in this election. There always are. But there's no evidence of significant fraud, conspiracies, or even significant anomalies that cast any serious doubt on who actually won the election. And you know, one of the ways you can tell is look at the big picture in Pennsylvania. Look at what happened.
So we're listening to Republican Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey right now arguing against objections to the counting of the electoral votes. This body has already rejected this first challenge, the first state challenge, which in this case was Arizona. I know it gets a bit confusing. That's why I've got Derek Hake standing by to bail me out here a little bit. Walk us through what's happening here, Derek.
Lester, right now we're seeing Pat Toomey, a Republican senator from Pennsylvania, essentially preemptively defending how his state ran its election. We know that there'll be challenges later on tonight to Pennsylvania electors, and Toomey, to his credit, has been very outspoken that he believes the Pennsylvania election was fair and forthrightly run, and he's going to defend his state. They're doing this now on the Senate floor because they're operating a little bit ahead of the House's schedule. Remember, both chambers get up to 2 hours of debate time. They can use all of it or not. In this case, the Senate has finished their debate on Arizona first, and they voted 93-6 to reject this objection to the electors. So meaning the electors, as far as the Senate's concerned, for Joe Biden would count. And now they've basically got nothing to do until the House finishes their debate and starts their vote. A note for our viewers, that will be a very long process. The House has initiated some COVID-related protocols where they vote in groups. And House votes, even regular House votes, can sometimes be hours-long affairs to get everybody in and out of the chamber. So we're looking at a pretty long night here.
You said 93-6, so that means Republicans would have lost some of the senators that had previously indicated they would object.
Yeah, that's right. They've lost a couple of their newer members. Cynthia Lummis, for example, of Wyoming, who's a new member, said she would no longer sustain that objection. James Lankford, who we talked about earlier, Steve Daines of Montana, who just got reelected, dropped his objection. But the core group sticking together, I'm looking at the list now. Josh Hawley sticking with his objections. Cindy Hyde-Smith of Mississippi. Roger Marshall, new member of Kansas. Tommy Tuberville, the former Auburn coach, new senator from Alabama. Ted Cruz and John Neely Kennedy of Louisiana are the 6 Republicans who voted to uphold this objection to the Arizona electors. We'll see if even that group sticks together for the further objections, or if some of them perhaps felt like, having said they would go this far, they still had to, kind of go ahead and put their money where their mouth is.
Pushing forward, even with those images still fresh in our mind of what transpired at the Capitol today, and of course, both the Senate and House back at the business of debating these objections. I want to go to our political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. You heard Chuck, 93-6, this first objection. Arizona's numbers has been rejected. There's no reason to think that the others won't follow. And as I mentioned on the air, and probably should mention it more often, that we're putting an awful lot of attention into this process right now because of all that has transpired today. But this is a foregone conclusion. There is no drama here.
It completely, and in fact, before we saw the incidents today and this insurrection, I had been describing what we were going to watch today is performance art, right? Basically, a bunch of ambitious models that want to demonstrate to the Trump base that they were rhetorically willing to pull this stunt, if you will. And to think that we went through this whole thing, the country is rattled, and here are our 6. And it is interesting when you look. 5 of these 6 votes: Josh Hawley, John Kennedy, Cindy Hyde-Smith, Roger Marshall, Tommy Tuberville. It's Alabama, Mississippi, it's Louisiana, Kansas, Missouri, of course, Cruz's Texas. Those are some deep red states. Those are folks who their political careers in their minds, go up or down based on what the Trump base thinks of them. So it does sort of, you can see this, it's been stripped, we in some ways today, stripped down to the core. What is the core, who are the senators that feel as if they have to stick by him? And so you see here, I mean, when you think about it, just 6 Republicans now willing to stand with Donald Trump. It's a remarkable number because just 2 days ago, it's very possible this number could have easily been 24. And between what happened last night in Georgia and of course the disaster of today, I think Donald Trump is finding out he has no more out.
Yeah, and Chuck, this happened today. The control of the U.S. Senate went to the Democrats after the John Ossoff victory in the special election in Georgia. And we haven't even had a chance to really digest that, how that plays into all this.
No, look, in some ways, before today's events, how Georgia went, I think a lot of us thought, okay, if Democrats do end up swinging the Senate seat, does that sort of take some of the air out of some of what we were going to see today? And what it seemed to do is sort of, obviously spin the president up to a point of where he's not fully, whatever it is, he's not fully able to perhaps control his anger, control his emotions here. And it certainly set him off because everybody, he went and attacked me on Twitter because I made the note that those defeats for those Republican incumbents down in Georgia, they belong to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's legacy as a political leader of the Republican Party has been a disaster. He came into office, and there are, with a House majority and a Senate majority, he walks away with the Democrats in charge of the White House, the House, and the Senate. So here he was with that, and possibly, this whole thing is imploding. And in words of Mitt Romney, that his pride is so wounded he can't seem to handle this moment. But this move here with the Senate, look, it means we're going to see a governing majority, and if anything, the events of today, Lester, I actually think it's going to have an interesting balming, perhaps, and you're already starting to see it, BALM, when I say balming, on the United States Senators. And I think it's possible that Joe Biden, a former senator himself, who has personal relationships with many of those Republicans who have defended the Constitution, people like Pat Toomey and Mitch McConnell, you might start to see briefly a semi-functional Senate for a period of time. There's an opportunity here for Joe Biden that he may end up having, he may have some brief moments of comity, if you will, where there may be a lot of Republicans who, sort of ashamed of what's happened this month, who feel that they've got to make an extra effort to go across the aisle. There are a lot of people, oddly enough, with President Biden, to sort of unite this country, at least unite this city.
Chuck, don't go far. Today has been a day that will go down in infamy in the history books. While many expected protests today, no one could have imagined it would go as far as it did. So how did we get here? This is Josh Mankiewicz. Mankiewicz takes it back.
You didn't see this coming. That's the question you're paying attention. This is a fraud on the American public. Start election night before all the voter and criminal. The president will give lawful right to those involved who are all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list. Okay? It's a very sad moment. A lot of people know. Let's see if you can trust the folks that want to gather in America with communalism and look at it right in. To a book inside. A lot only got one. The day after the election, the outcome still out. Mr. Trump tried to claim victory. Literally. On Twitter, he claimed for electoral purposes. In Pennsylvania. Voters, however, have laid their plans elsewhere. Joe Biden won, and President Trump reached for that volume knob again and again. If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. The following is a believable comedy of errors, a shotgun marriage of performance art and politics. Culminating in Rudy Giuliani's press conference with Four Seasons Purple Landscaping in Pennsylvania.
Gee, it's about 700,000 votes. That President Trump was a headline 2 days ago. And disappeared.
It felt like the last dance of a failed campaign, except it wasn't over. And very soon it wasn't free either. This election was stolen by mail-in ballots. Those are the ballots that were stuck in the machine 8 times, 9 times, 10 times. Senator Mitt Romney offered Biden early congratulations on his win. Other Republican leaders pretended it simply hadn't happened. As January 6th approached, President Trump seemed no closer to admitting the electoral reality in front of him.
There's no way I lost Georgia. There's no way. We won by hundreds of thousands of votes.
Over the weekend, Trump called Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, to claim victory where none existed, and to ask for help in conjuring votes out of thin air and even thinner evidence.
I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
On Monday, Mr. Trump told his supporters again there was simply no way he had lost.
We demonstrated that we won the election in a landslide.
Senator Romney got a taste of the anger that generated, as seen in this cell phone video shot at an airport before tonight's joint session of Congress.
Why are you supporting President Trump?
The temperature was rising, and once again, Trump seemed to be thinking less about how democracy works and more about his favorite subjects, himself and his enemies. Here he is this morning at a rally in Washington.
We will never give up. We will never concede. We will stop the steal.
And then his call to action.
And we're going to have to fight much harder. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol. And we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
Well, think just as supporters broke into the Capitol. After hours of frightening chaos, the president released a video urging them to go home in peace. And then, in the same breath, repeated his lie that the 2020 election was stolen. We are a government of laws and not of men, said John Adams 200 years ago. Today, that idea was tested. Tonight, it may be proven true.
Josh Mankiewicz kind of walking us through how we got to where we are today. We want to bring in now White House correspondent Peter Alexander. He's had a front row to all of this these past several years. I want to know what you have to think about that, Peter, what we just walked through that was just laid out.
Well, Josh laid it out very well. I'm struck by the fact that we as Americans right now have this chief executive who is more connected to the fantasy of how he lost than he is to the reality of the fact that he was, in fact, voted out of office. Some of the most striking comments we've heard from the president over the course of these last several weeks are those that we showed you from today, where the president, inciting those supporters, said to them, "We're going to go to the Capitol. I'm going to be there with you. We have to fight harder." He called this an egregious assault on democracy. Of course, they went that direction in mass, mobs ultimately storming the Capitol, taking it under siege. The president wasn't there for any of it, but it's his language, really, and I've witnessed this from traveling in his campaign events over the course of the last several months and covering him for the last several years. It's his language that these Trump supporters, ultimately riders, have marinated in over the course of these last several years, and without any other information, without a shared set of facts anymore, when there are some individuals who have a different set of facts, which, as was once coined by one of the presidents, barricades alternative facts and the real facts that we witnessed. It's fundamentally a real challenge for democracy, and this is the implosion, this rebellion, this revolt was a function of that today. It was an alarming day. It was an awful day. I was there at the White House as I left with security as is our precaution to leave the White House earlier. I passed through just a huge parade of Trump supporters yelling obscenities, stop the steal, and frankly, you didn't stop to enter a conversation with them, but as you heard the conversation, among some of these folks, some of the things they were saying was literally echoing the words of the president, and you just wanted to fact check every one of them. But in spite of that, and frankly, in spite of the president's effort to sort of create some calm like tonight, it was still mixed with the complaints, and neither of them, I suspect, were heard.
Yeah, Peter, I recall maybe the day of or a day or two before the election, seeing an interview with the president in which he seemed very reflective, and he was talking about how painful the idea of losing is. I mean, no one likes to lose, but winning is certainly part of the image that he likes to project. I mean, you've seen this in action.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the thing you heard from the beginning of his campaign was this idea of winning. We're going to get so sick of winning, the president used to say. And he also would emphasize this other idea, which is the idea of strength. He said it in his comments today, that weakness is sort of the ultimate fault one can have. You have to demonstrate strength. Even in these moments where the president was on the defensive, he would do something sort of more outlandish, more grandiose, in fact, to try to demonstrate this position of strength, even if it was ultimately him who was the one who needed to be defending it. It reminds me of a moment that I had with the president early on in this pandemic in March when I asked the president, what was the message he would share with Americans who were scared? This is not only about 200 Americans. I think only a handful of Americans are diving 200 cases. It just didn't happen. Already that fear was seeping in. We heard it. I heard it from loved ones, from neighbors, from others. And I asked the president to speak to the camera and what would he say to the immersion Americans who worry not about a conversation between me and him, but about their own family safety and their safety. So, what I'm struck by is what the off-ramp is for this president at this point. Probably today, you would never concede this. Because the Republicans are obviously curious, and I think that like that's one. But that conversations reported with very happy idea that you think this is an and censure or even impeachment again. What does the president do in here? Does he ever concede what does this do with the political future of the party? Probably not a good thing. Certainly his efforts to retain the political. So there are a wide range beyond his base. Peter, go ahead and join us for coverage. We are continuing to monitor both houses of Congress. The Senate was finished. However, the House of Representatives got a bit of a later start to chaos. They are just now getting to that vote. Let's tip in for a while as they come. This much the leaders in the state are back Chuck again. We expect this to go down pretty much as hard as it did in the Senate. Is there anything for you? Well, not quite as hard. I mean, that's the question there. So I think of what my work clothes. You guys caught me there standing up to look at my return monitor there. I was just rolling for a while and put my camera away so I can go through the trouble just to see where I got the driving out here. We expected somewhere between 130 to 150 House Republicans to essentially agree to this objection. So that's the number we're looking for. And I say everything under, as you start to see, if it's not going to grow as much there, it's interesting to be received. Quite a few Republicans have decided that's what to watch for. That'll tell us whether we're seeing the same thing. Is it less than 100? Or is it really low? Yeah, for folks that don't watch this thing on a regular basis, why is it a different
members of the House on a question like this as opposed to the Senate?
Well, it's a huge difference, for many of these guys, because remember the term gerrymandering, right? As the way these congressional districts are drawn, most of these members of Congress only really would have, somewhere, particularly on many of these House Republican states, 70 to 75% of their constituents are Trump supporters. And then Trump won their districts with 60, 70% of the poll. So these are, their entire political career in their minds is on the line if they cross the president. And look, unlike many of the president's supporters in the Senate, who frankly are written out of political convenience, they've seen whether it's Ted Cruz, who denounced him at the Republican convention 4 years ago, announced his buddy with Lindsey Graham, right? The House Republicans are genuine supporters of the president. Okay, they're not doing it out of any sense as much as perhaps with the same level of cynicism as we see in the Congress. And so I do expect that there's somebody who's bigger, and I do expect them to be, a little more, perhaps not quite as should be, as sort of not quite as embarrassed by what happened today. In fact, one of the president's probably most important supporters in the House is Matt Gaetz, a congressman from Florida. And believe it or not, he put out a fundraising email tonight, Lester, tonight, that said he was fighting for this election, and he was going to try to, and he was going to be objecting to this election in Washington tonight. He did.
All right, Chuck, thanks very much. I want to go to White House correspondent Hallie Jackson. Hallie, we're all kind of wondering what we wake up to tomorrow. Political landscape look any different? Will we see resignations of the president's inner circle? What do you hear? What do you sense?
So let's talk about this from sort of an actual nuts and bolts perspective, Lester, and then from sort of the political piece that you're asking about. From a nuts and bolts perspective, listen, this is what we're seeing here. It may be messy, it may be ugly, but it is the democratic process, at least for tonight, prevailing with this electoral vote count continuing on. 2 weeks, I think it's still Wednesday, 2 weeks from today, President-elect Biden will become President Biden. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris will become Vice President Kamala Harris. Right, that is going to happen on January 20th. So that is sort of big picture of what is next. The process will continue. However, there are some real question marks, as you point out here, about what we might wake up to tomorrow. So a couple of things on the issue of resignation. Yes. I'll tell you, Lester, that is the number one thing in the last hour or so that communicated sources I'm hearing about this discussion of who it may be, who they may be, if you may see resignations from multiple people at the same time. Nothing to be able to report firmly other than a couple of things. Sources familiar say that the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, is considering stepping down in protest. We're told that the Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao, by the way, Nixon Connell, of course, is considering what she is going to do next. So yes, I think people are doing some soul searching based on the reporting that I have tonight about whether they want to continue to be part of this administration moving forward. Secondly, there's also the president's reaction. He has essentially a data alert being placed on him right now by his social media accounts. It is the number one way to communicate. It is the preferred method of communication other than perhaps calling into a big network. He's basically nothing at this point because of his tweets being cited by coordinated social media companies, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. The huge concern that he could say more to pour gasoline on this fire, on this democratic fire, if you will. And so that time sort of comes up, right? The muzzle lips, if you will, tomorrow midday, I think, based on the timer, maybe tomorrow morning. What is he going to say? What is he going to say, and how will his supporters respond? Some of those supporters, of course, rioting at the Capitol. What happened at that point, Lester? Good question.
All right, Hallie, thanks. And Hallie, you mentioned that he's kind of in this timeout on social media, if you will. His pages essentially silenced by these social media companies. It's pretty chat right now. to get to the insight on how Silicon Valley here is, how social media companies are dealing with this, and really the larger issue they face.
Oscar, I'm going to tweet from the Apple CEO, Tim Cook, and he said, people who are responsible really ought to be held to account. There's a lot of critics out there of social media giants, not including Apple, saying that Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram are partially responsible for allowing this kind of violence to be planned, to be seeded, and then blossoming on their social media platforms for so long. And you have Mark Zuckerberg tonight putting it into words in an internal memo that he has confirmed here at NBC News, and he's calling it mob violence, saying that they're trying to implement additional measures to keep people safe. But on the other side of Silicon Valley and San Francisco, Twitter employees internally, according to our Ben Collins, our this tech team here at NBC, have been starting to really sound off. And this is what you've seen happen over the years. Other people speaking out to myself and our teammates about how they feel negatively about the power of social media when it comes to conspiracy theories, allowing militia groups to grow, things like that. And so we're hearing from internal current Twitter employees on their internal Slack channel saying things like, I don't think Fomenty Who's is a fair of the he's the president and can't deactivate him proud for 4 years now. This is a current Twitter employee saying this. But even I have to say, this employee goes on to say, I feel complicit in allowing this to happen, and I would like to see him deactivated immediately. Now, this comes as the companies are taking more aggressive action, right? We have Twitter suspending his account for 12 hours, blocking him out, and saying that if certain steps are not taken, that permanent suspension is very much on the table. We also have Facebook and their subsidiary Instagram doing a 24-hour lockout. Earlier today, all of the major social platforms took down that video that President Trump put out that basically these big social companies saying he didn't do enough to ask for the rioters to stop the violence on Capitol Hill. So it will be very interesting to see how the president communicates in the next 24 hours when he has lost his ability to do it directly on social media. And more interestingly, how these powerful executives, these CEOs and founders respond to this and what they learn from it going forward.
Joe and Ken walking us through all that. Thank you. It's interesting hearing the silence right now on social media from the president as all this plays out. I want to go to Garrett Haake right now on Capitol Hill. Garrett, we watched the Senate vote down the first state objection, in this case to Arizona. The House was voting. Where do you think stand?
That vote continues. We're about 20 minutes into it. I suspect it'll last at least another 20 minutes more. These House votes take a good deal of time because they rotate people through the chamber so that it never gets completely full. It's part of their COVID precautions. We're already seeing dozens of House Republicans voting both to uphold this objection and to oppose it. That's the interesting split here. All Democrats are opposing the objection here. As you said several times throughout the course of the night, Lester, this is a foregone conclusion how this will go. But I do think we're going to see a stronger pro-Trump vote here in this first House objection as some of these House Republicans trying to get on the record and in the good graces of the president and his supporters. And that's where we stand right now. And then the joint session that was interrupted early this afternoon will reconvene shortly after this vote. My understanding is they're going to go back in and clean the chamber, try to disinfect it one more time before they bring everybody back in and pick up right where they left off with whichever state comes after Arizona. My brain can no longer produce states alphabetically, though, so you're just going to have to take my word for it.
Yeah, I think you were not there either at this point of the day. But that being said, if there were another 5 or 6 states here, and the objections continue, I can do this math, it will be late tomorrow morning for this.
If there were those objections, if the lawmakers chose to use all 2 hours of the debate, then I think both of those things are less than likely. And the Hawley decision here to say he will object to Pennsylvania, but even he won't use his time to speak about that objection, suggests to me, at least on the Senate side, that the desire to fight this thing out in an all-nighter is really gone out of the chamber. There may be some desire in the House to do that, but without senators who agree, it doesn't go anywhere. So I think it's possible that we could see, another breakthrough debate on Pennsylvania, maybe another breakthrough debate on Georgia, which had been something the Republicans were talking about so much earlier in the week. But one of the main drivers for that was Kelly Loeffler, who has lost the re-election, and said on the Senate floor a little while ago that she's not interested in continuing this fight tonight. So, maybe that leaves Wisconsin. Ron Johnson, who I spoke to earlier tonight, wouldn't say one way or the other whether he would object to the electors from his home state. I suppose that's a possibility, but he also didn't vote on the to with the Joe Biden with presidential reality. So that suggests to me that he's not interested in this fight. So again, this is a lot of tea leaf reading, but I do think we're probably looking at a brief objection over Pennsylvania, and maybe, just maybe, that's it.
We heard from the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, earlier when they came back into this evening session, and he gave another impassioned speech about all this. Do we know if he was working the room during the time the senators were in lockdown? Was he continuing to try and break people loose from opposing these votes?
I don't know that definitively, but my gut is no. That's not generally how he operates.
That's regarding that.
Really
The House is voting on that Arizona objection, whatever that means. I guess it's regarding how it went down. The count or something. But it stands for an all Democrat. If that makes sense.
Senators that will would vote against any of these objections because of vote constantly. There has been, these senators were essentially locked in one big room together. There's something bordering on 6 hours today. I suspect over the next coming days, we'll learn a lot about what was said behind closed doors. There may have been other untwisting going on, but I think it's unlikely that that pressure came from McConnell. He made his point clear, and I think the appearance of him trying to strong arm his members, it's just not the way he would operate. I don't think he would have thought that would be helpful, if that makes any sense.
Gary, thank you. We'll continue to monitor what's happening in both chambers right now. We're just going to continue facilities objections. Since chaos and violence unfolded in one of the most secure and sacred places I've ever talked about, NBC's Harry Smith as a reminder of what it represents.
The Capitol building that was so viciously overrun by rioters today is usually as proud a place as exists in America. It's where Franklin Roosevelt steadied the nation crippled by the Depression. Where John F. Kennedy called the country to service.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Anyone who has walked through it, be it on a school trip or a family vacation, can feel the Capitol's power. It is palpable. To know that the nation's business is carried on there makes your heart skip a beat or two. Through times of peace and times of conflict, through times of want and times of plenty, most of us have believed or wanted to believe that the Capitol is a place where the people's business was conducted. We the people's business. Throughout our history, representatives came from every corner of the country. And as the country grew, so too did the House and Senate. It grew to look more and more like we do. A place where men and women had come to work as equals, where color and race was not there. I have sat in the House chamber for a State of the Union address. I remember looking around the room, from the Supreme Court to the Joint Chiefs, the Cabinet, members of the House and Senate, the robust cheers, the stony silence, a beautifully imperfect mix. The founders conjured all this up, and while it sure was more diverse by gender and race than they ever imagined, it was their idea, the American idea. I have stood in line twice at the Capitol to pay respects to presidents who passed. Both times were the same. You'd expect, I guess, the crowd to be dominated by the party faithful of the president who died. But it wasn't like that. Whatever our differences, we were normal, unimportant, like Republicans and Democrats lifting their voices together after 9/11. Our most imperfect suffered joy today. The simple procedural step in the peaceful transition of power was crashed by an angry mob. It was as disturbing as it was heartbreaking. It was, quite frankly, un-American. Most of us have refused to believe in our ability to govern ourselves, to abide by the will of our fellow citizens. Many have sacrificed much, and some have sacrificed all to ensure those rights. If not just for them, but for future generations who pray we never see anything like today's atrocity again.
Very simple, reflective piece on where we are as a country. Before we close at this hour, I want to bring back Chuck Todd. And Chuck, I hadn't seen Harry's story, and so I didn't know that he was going to play that moment on 9/11, where the spontaneous singing of God Bless America by members of Congress. And I was thinking about that several times today, and there it was. It feels like, obviously that was a horrible day, but that piece of it, it feels like part of America we won't get back.
You know, that day we were united because it was an outside force that was coming after us. It was coming after our way of life. What makes today so disturbing is that it was an inside force. This came from within. Look, this is an inflection point for the country. This is an inflection point for our politics. This is an inflection point for a lot of things. The question is, to what end? Is this going to be a moment that everybody takes this breath and we realize this divisive politics can destroy us? You know, it has been an intimidating feature of our politics for most of my lifetime. It's been getting worse and worse and worse, and we keep wondering, well, at some point are we going to get a breaking point? You know, today felt like that breaking point. And the question is it going to be this breaking point that turns into an inflection point where we have a bunch of people who take a step back and realize country cares.
And I was also reflecting on the notion that as journalists, we enjoy the give and take of politics and the surprises and the jockeying for the vision. We cover that sometimes like a sport. This is fun.
No, it hasn't been, Lester, and I can tell you, I have been sick to my stomach about it because of that. And it's like, I certainly, I'm not ready to go back and cover regular politics.
Chuck, thank you. It was an extraordinary day. We will see what tomorrow brings. NBC News, of course, will continue to cover this. This does it right now for our special report. Tune in to tomorrow for today. Savannah and Harlow are the very latest on the overnight events. For all of us here at NBC News, I'm Lester Holt. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, Lucy. And you. He's close. Chaos in the Capitol. Pro-Trump supporters and rioters break through barricades.
President lights it next to that fire, and this is what we have.
Lawmakers forced to lock down, temporarily stopping the Electoral College vote.
This is not the Senate. It's disorder. It's chaos. Borders on sedition.
As the National Guard regains control. Democrats and Republicans refusing to let today's darkness damage democracy. And with that, good evening, everyone. I'm Colin Lewis.
And I'm Carolyn Johnson. It has been an extraordinary day as people here and around the world witnessed and assault on our democracy. We begin tonight at the U.S. Capitol. Pro-Trump supporters being laid on the grounds without a curfew that began the final hours of the day. So much has unfolded today. Here's the very latest. That DC-wide curfew remains in effect until 6 a.m. A woman shot during the chaos inside the Capitol has died. The FBI says 2 explosive devices were discovered in a storm the Capitol. Tonight, the National Guard is there. Calm, and Sergeant Allen says the Capitol is now secure. The House and Senate both now back in session.
And so tonight, Congress reconvened to finish the electoral vote count.
NBC4's Tony Allen brings us live from the news operations center right now. We have more on what happened here today.
Extraordinary day. They are still working
can tell you we should have seen this coming. President Donald Trump for the past several months has been spreading lies and mistruths about the election, even today, saying he won by a landslide when he lost by millions of votes, and telling his most ardent supporters, his most militant supporters, to continue to fight, which they did by attacking the citadel of American democracy. It was a moment the likes of which had not been seen since the British burned the U.S. Capitol in the War of 1812. A mob of President Donald Trump's most militant supporters overwhelmed barricades of the U.S. Capitol Police, making their way into the mobile halls of the Capitol itself, taking over congressional offices and forcing lawmakers to run for safety, putting the seat of American government in a security lockdown. The effort was aimed at stopping the formal counting of electoral college votes, ensuring Joe Biden's victory in the presidential election of 2 months ago. The process, normally ceremonial, taking on an unprecedented time, as over 100 Republican members of Congress challenged votes from battleground states that had gone for Biden, starting with Arizona, claiming unproven voter fraud. It's a President Trump has called this out. Democrats condemned the effort as an assault on democracy, as did the leading Republican in Congress, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
This election will overturn mere allegations from the losing side. Our democracy would never be style.
McConnell, now viewed as a traitor to thousands who moments later stormed the building. Vice President Mike Pence, presiding over the session, also rushed to safety. While some of the protesters broke into offices, elsewhere there was violence. Police using pepper spray, with one protester, a woman, shot. She was later pronounced dead at a D.C. hospital. President-elect Joe Biden called on President Trump to stop the unrest.
It's not protest.
It's insurrection. With help from multiple law enforcement agencies, Capitol Police were eventually able to clear the building. Both chambers returned to finish the job of finishing the election.
To those who wreaked havoc in our capital today, you did not win. They tried to disrupt our democracy. They failed.
The extraordinary, unlawful, and terrorizing events in the most hallowed building of self-government failing to stop the advance of American democracy. To be pointed out to some of those Republican senators who were going to object to various states and their electoral college vote, have said they will not withdraw that objection. However, a few say they will continue. So they continue to debate on the floor of the U.S. Capitol, in the House and the Senate. It won't change anything. It is pro forma. The fact of the matter is, once this is over, the House and the Senate will confirm President Donald Trump will be leaving office on the 20th of January with a new president-elect, Joe Biden, and Vice President Kamala Harris. I'm Tony Miller, NBC 4 News.
Let's talk about some of the fallout from what happened there today. Some top aides at the White House resigning tonight. Also, Twitter and Facebook. I think Facebook locked out the president for 24 hours, Twitter 12 hours, locked him out of his account. What about that fallout there?
Well, remember, he did post a video where he told people to go home. But prior, the preamble of that was, yes, we were robbed. The election was stolen. You have a right to be very angry. So he was once again exhorting the crowd not to leave, but actually do what he had asked them to do earlier, which was essentially storm the Capitol. That's why social media companies decided to freeze his account. I have to tell you, they have some concern because there are many people who wonder whether or not what we saw today was a direct result of Facebook, Twitter, and the wild, wild west, if you will, of the World Wide Web.
Mike, thank you for that. We have some experts coming up in just a couple of minutes to weigh in more on that. Caroline.
Well, as the mob stormed the steps of the U.S. Capitol, members of Congress went into lockdown, some wearing masks as they hunkered down in their offices or other undisclosed locations. NBC 4's Kathy Barr spoke with California representatives as the chaos unfolded.
Just moments after rioters stormed the Capitol building and Congress members were forced to go into lockdown, we were able to reach California Congresswomen Maxine Waters and Karen Bass as they were being locked inside their offices and watched along with the rest of the nation the stunning images unfold. California Congresswoman Karen Bass and her Republican and Democratic colleagues evacuating with gas masks as violent protesters smashed
and Senate floors. The Congresswoman placing blame for the riot squarely on the shoulders of President Trump. Senior Congresswoman Maxine Waters in shock as she was talking to us from her locked office and watching the events unfold on live TV.
They have brought the whole Saturday into the Capitol. They're marching in on the Senate floor now. I can see that with signs.
Congresswoman Waters saying she had never seen anything like it.
Even I,
Is that what Danny Carter does not
have had a lot in my life.
That is a question you should
I'm not believing what I'm seeing and experiencing right now.
Both wonder how it could have happened.
How could you possibly want to?
Believing that they can get
No!
somebody inside. I just don't understand how we could have all gotten. Real security.
You are the reason she is in the letter. The reason I live here.
Representative Ted Little, member of the House Judiciary Committee, says that he was looking at a letter to Vice President Mike Pence to initiate the 25th amendment process and remove the president from power. Kathy Barr, so our top girl NBC4's Robert Kovacic spoke with Orange County Representative Rudy Correa from inside his Capitol Hill office. Robert joins us right now with more on that. Read what the congressman had to say about the experience today. Robert.
Colleen, what an experience it was for him. He was in the middle of it all, but his perspective was astonished. He took his family to the airport for a flight back here in Southern California. And then Congressman Mike Correa headed back to the Capitol.
Like a train
Child,
full
neither living.
that was full of
I grew to love her smart,
trumpets
and she grew to love me as her father.
coming to express themselves.
And so she came to take the box.
Very
I
respectful.
had no way.
Nothing out of the ordinary.
I told him that storing the box on the back of the photos would be the safest
President
place.
lights a match
After
without
all,
fire.
the best that I
This is what we have.
lied.
We're not
I
gonna
did
do
it to
that.
save my
This is
child.
what we have.
Surely you can understand. Where's your pride? Retrieve the box.
We didn't have enough.
Reveal my
Showing my colleagues loud and clear.
misfortune me into the confess the truth.
The security guards told Representative Correa something he never expected to hear in the House of Representatives.
If you begin to smell tear gas, put your
Don't
knife
you
over your head.
understand? If you take it to the flag,
I've been in the Senate 4 years, I've never seen a gas mask.
stop at nothing.
They said, look under your table, look under your chair. Sure
If
enough,
you-
that's where the masks were.
And what will the Democrats in Santa Ana take away from
There's
this
a
terrifying day?
Something that I didn't expect happened. Democrats.
Yes, of course. We need to offer the stone. We did our make a weapon.
All of us knew we were on the same boat.
But not like this.
Yes, we were
This
up
weapon
against
give you the right,
We
give
didn't
you
know
what you
exit.
rightly
You
deserve.
began to see us.
The stone rests in the pit of Tartarus.
That
Bring it to me
is
and
the
I'll
silver lining I see today.
Congressman Correa told me that what we learned today, democracy is fragile. And that moving forward, democracy depends on citizens voting based on facts, not based on a tweet. And with that, he went back to work to certify the election of the next president of the United States.
An incredible day's work, Robert. Well, just in DC Metro Police now say 4 people died as Trump supporters occupied the Capitol. A woman shot by police and 3 more in medical emergencies. And a breach of what's supposed to be one of the most secure buildings in our country has me asking, how could this have happened? The IT's Lolita Lopez has been looking into the serious security questions raised by today's unprecedented assault.
You can see right now, people are like saying that Trump supporters. The barrier here.
reporter in D.C. as alleged President Trump supporters stormed into the nation's Capitol building while Congress was doing the Electoral College vote count.
I'm actually shocked and disappointed that one of the most secure facilities in our country was easily breached. Our members of Congress and the Senate put in a march away.
Terrorism expert, former FBI special agent and police officer, and now the director of USC's Safe Communities Institute, Eric Suthers, questioning how police became so overwhelmed.
There's nothing that should have been unanticipated about this. We had weeks of notice, weeks to prepare.
Suthers reading text messages from friends inside the Capitol who shared their reactions as the situation escalated.
We will not be intimidated, we will not be deterred.
Suthers said there are at least a dozen agencies that have jurisdiction in Washington, but the Capitol is primarily protected by the Capitol Police. The description on Twitter reads to protect the Congress, its legislative processes, members, employees, visitors, and facilities from crime, destruction, or terrorism.
I'm embarrassed as an American that we are watching things that typically play out in other countries when dictators are in charge. We are watching it play out here in real time. This is frightening. No one should underestimate what is happening here.
The former U.S. Capitol Police Chief telling Meet the Press today, quote, I don't have an explanation of their failure, but there's a freaking failure.
And with all due respect, there's some complicity that goes along with this with the president, but that goes with the senators who decided to give these people more false hope about a process that is akin to trying to fight gravity.
That process, the counting of electoral college votes. The gravity of this issue is enormous, considering who was inside, including the Vice President and the House Speaker, Mayor Professor Jessica Levinson. It certainly is sobering to think about, so many people in the line, especially who are in that particular building at the time when really security was breached. Yeah, now others believe many of the rioters could face charges of sedition as that in the of law, there is a right to dissent, not to destroy. Thank you for that. Now, no surprise, social media is all buzz about all the developments what happened in Washington today. One question being posed at this point, why did it take police so long? Why didn't they respond to this? Why did it have to take racial justice demonstration? And joining us now is Stuart Arnold, Professor of Law at USC. And Jody, just a surreal scene today. We watched this riotous crowd push back into the Capitol. What do you think of this? It realizes how we mentioned the short contrast what we've seen with other misinformed places in Washington.
It can start kind of fast, and General Gardner one day earlier first pointed out that there wasn't just incompetence on the part of the team to be complicit. They seem to allow this to happen in ways that they would have not allowed to happen if it was Black Lives Matter activists, for example, and advocate. And it makes one wonder how the police do their policing is affected by the political positions of the protesters that lead. Most police unions supported Trump. Most police officers were Trump supporters, and so they were policing protesters who political brothers they agreed with, who were political soulmates. When it came to policing Black Lives Matter, activists they legitimize political adversaries. And so there doesn't seem to be that double standard that this is shining a light on.
Professor Harper, 13 people arrested, that's the number we're getting right now. Does that seem like a small number with the magnitude of what happened and the size of the crowds there?
Oh yeah, this is part of the drop in the bucket, and it reflects priorities, right? There are certain priorities. If this were again Black Lives Matter activists, there would have been tear gas, rubber bullets, canisters, and that would probably some fatalities by this time, which was kind of behavior. But we see here a wider berth to the freedom to express your opinion and to protest and petition when you are people who
broke out earlier today at Pro-Trump rally in Beverly Hills. News Chopper 4 Alpha. Over the scene near North Cannon Drive and Santa Monica Boulevard. This happened about 5:30 this afternoon. About 100 people were gathered there to demonstrate, but an unlawful assembly after the incident you're seeing there. A pro-Trump group has been gathering there on a regular basis for some time now. Also, there was some tense moments in downtown LA this afternoon when pro and anti-Trump protesters. See there? News Chopper 4 Alpha also flew overhead as tear gas and fists flew just outside LAPD headquarters. Officers were in riot gear. They tried to break up several fights around noon today. Police did arrest 6 people. We spoke with former LA County Sheriff Jim McDonald about what law enforcement is likely doing to head off more violence in the days ahead.
Activity, groups of people advocating, monitoring what they can as far as social media activity, those type of things are game changers for crowd management.
Now, we did saw one man walking away from the fight. His face looked pretty bloody there, but protests were relatively short-lived as they cleared out like early this afternoon. Going Georgia, where John Ossoff has defeated Republican incumbents David Perdue in their Senate runoff race. It basically turns his fellow Democrat Raphael Warnock defeated Republican Senator Paul Loeffler in Georgia's other runoff contest. The 2 victories give Democrats control of the Senate. This, of course, a major boost for President-elect Joe Biden's nominees and his agenda.
It's the honor of my life that I get to represent this very great state in the United States.
Thank you for the confidence and trust that you have placed in me.
33-year-old Ossoff will become the youngest U.S. senator elected since 40-year-old Joe Biden back in 1973. The Senate will now stand at 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, allowing incoming Vice President Kamala Harris to cast high-breaking votes. And joining us now is our NBC4 political contributor, Anjali Farah. Will today's violence change the course of the Republican Party? I think we are seeing a major shift in what's going on with regard to the Republican Party. I think we are seeing some Republicans acting enough by the violence that they saw today to actually double down on our democracy. And so other Republicans, granted a smaller minority, but still a noticeable set of Republicans who wanted to double down on their loyalty to President Trump. And so I do think there is a very, very real kind of reckoning that is coming to the Republican Party going forward. Doctor, let's talk about the 25th Amendment here. Congressman Ted Lieu was talking about that this evening. Specifically, would it be applicable here to discuss how it would work? Well, yes, the 25th Amendment is designed again for these kind of circumstances when a president is presumed to be incapacitated in some way. So certainly it can be if you were physically incapacitated. It's not much of a assassination attempt on his life. There was debate about whether or not the 25th Amendment should be, kind of put into place until he came out of surgery. But this can also include a very broad definition of incapacitation. So mentally incapacitated certainly deemed as a bad injury. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because critics say the president really poured gasoline on the fire here today. He didn't step in. He didn't try to address the crowds. He didn't try to get them to move out of there. Hence the reason for the 25th Amendment. Yes, and I think again, cabinet, whether or not the cabinet members will resign, or whether or not they will implement this tomorrow. All right, thank you so much, Dr. Anjali Farah. We appreciate your insight as always. Thank you. Now to the coronavirus. His health department confirmed 459 new COVID deaths in the state today. This as hospitalizations reached a new high with nearly 23,000 COVID-19 patients admitted for treatment statewide. Hospitals in LA and Orange counties are now operating under a new state health order that delays non-essential surgeries because of the overcrowding. And LA Mayor Garcetti says 4 new COVID vaccinations are opening in the city. It's all part of a county-wide effort to accelerate the administration of these vaccines. Now, LA County is reporting another 258 deaths, as I said, nearly 12,000 new cases. Officials say 8,023 people are currently hospitalized. NBC4's Patrick Healy reports with each day the critical condition of the hospitals themselves becomes ever more apparent. Juggling resources, moving around patients, hospitals pushing through another day stressed to the limit by COVID cases. Arcadius Methodist Hospital, the first in Southern California to acknowledge it is now operating under crisis care guidelines.
Well, what that means is we convened a triage team.
A team that Chief Strategy Officer Cliff Daniels says is to ensure the most effective use of resources and so far has not had to take the step of actually rationing care. But
I think we are close. I think that as every hospital here in Southern California, every day is a struggle to identify the nurses.
The COVID crisis has truly formed a gridlock for our hospital.
cardiologist Chris Christodoulou says the suspension of all emergency surgeries ordered by the state is in some cases a reverse effect of prolonging stay. Citing a patient at another hospital in need of heart valve repair after cardiac arrest.
We're not able to discharge her, and we're told we cannot do that much safely.
There's been success treating monoclonal antibodies. And at least one hospital, the Montgomery Medical Center, has set up a mobile clinic for amazing patients with moderate symptoms who are then able to go home without being admitted. But LA County health officials again today emphasized the most immediate way to reduce stress on hospitals is for people to avoid the mixing that leads to spread. Is no pathway to making our hospital. We want influencers to urge their followers to keep their faces covered whenever they're around other people, to avoid the mixing, and whenever possible, just stay inside at least for this month. Reporting by Patrick Healy, NBC4 News. Carolyn and Colleen.
All right, Patrick, thank you. And we're following a cool, crispy night out there right now. This is a live look from News Shop before Bravo over downtown LA. Just a beautiful meteorologist heading around is tracking those current conditions for us. Anthony, currently temperatures are mostly within sections coming at 47 degrees, freezing in Big Bear, Lancaster 50 degrees, and right now in LA coming in at 57 degrees. And as you saw from our helicopter shot, clear skies right now. A high humidity though, what we've seen is definitely some patchy thick fog in the morning time. Looks like it's a little more confined to the coast as we move toward the night. Let's head out to Northridge and get your outback forecast. It's 58 degrees right now. Maybe a few more on the commute tonight. As we head into tomorrow, we're going to find out.
So that'll be all for today, folks. If you like that video, please don't forget to, subscribe, like, and share and stuff. I'll do some more tomorrow. So until the next time we'll meet, see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic day. Bye.
During this COVID crisis, you're working could send cash to hard-hit
Come
restaurants,
on.
but it could take months for that help to arrive.
See shocking images of rioters breaking into the
It's time to eat like you will always be wearing elastic waistbands. With Boyo Fit